the title of my talk is Antidote for the Weary, which was something I wrote about uh, in a blog piece. And I wanted to start by um, sort of talking about the 49-day training and the theme around that, and um, then talk a bit about like this theme of weary, like what is weary, and my reflections on um yeah, just like whether this theme was still alive for me or not. And then, what does it mean to be like an antidote to the weary? So, in terms of the 49-day training, this form kind of follows something that we did last year, which was a 90-day training. And it was something that Jasleen had come up with as an idea. I think she had seen it being done somewhere else and raised it to us as something we could try. And it wound up being a really interesting experience for us. A lot of the focus in our training is you do the consistent daily practice, oftentimes like on your own if you're living remotely. And then we come together in person to do intensive training. And, so much of our focus is on sesshin or keishin and kind of boosting up training. But this was an interesting experience for me last year when we focused on just having better consistency together. And we used that to build up to uh, Keishin. And we're doing a similar thing this year, but 49 days was what we chose. And so shorter, and seeing what comes out of it. And the core components being, making a commitment to daily zazen. And we said this year, making a commitment to another practice, which could be like something, I said that makes your heart sing. And I'll say more about that, but something that you're putting your energy into, and it's something of your own choosing. Um, and this was supposed to be something active, not like, catching up on your favorite reality TV show or something like that. um, and last year the theme was habits, and that was a really interesting theme to explore. I think we got a lot of mileage out of that. This year the theme was being time to renew time, and that was a turn of phrase that White Law Roshi came up with. But we both were kind of on the same wavelength around theme. She said, we got to do something about refreshing this time. And I said, I just wrote this piece about Antidote to the Weary, where I think I was talking about the same the same kind of thing. And maybe it can be around that. And I don't know whether this theme is as you know I, as interesting or as compelling as the one about habits, or I'd be interested to hear. I mean, you all showed up, so maybe it was for you, but but it would be interesting to hear, and we'll have opportunities to kind of go back and forth in the course of this talk um, about your reflections as well. So that would be good. Um, so I think like coming into this period, at least for me, life has changed pretty dramatically. Where, we're coming out of the pandemic. Um, we're starting to get back to life as normal, but life doesn't feel, it's not the normal we had before. At least it isn't for me. Maybe it is for some people, like if you're a doctor, maybe you're still going to work every day. And but for me, my life has changed pretty dramatically. I've been working 100% remote basically for 3 years now, on the COVID response. And it's been kind of a slog. And the most recent 6 months. We've been moving the COVID response into the routine program, creating a new division that focuses on COVID and other respiratory viruses. And I've been an acting team lead within that division for the past 6 months. And so I'm coming into this time kind of completely burnt out, to be honest with you. Um, there's a lot of monotony to the daily tasks, some isolation in the mix, right? I felt like, during the pandemic, I learned, as a introverted person, like what was the minimal amount required of interacting with other people in person. Like that, if I didn't interact with friends or family, at least like one time per week, you know, things were a little bit weird for me. But I'm reflecting, like, is that minimal amount what I want? Like going forward, am I just trying to do the minimal amount, or do I want more than that? Like what would thriving, kind of look like for me in this new context? Um, I'm pretty overworked. I'm dealing with how to engage, the team, how to engage others, like all of you, in the context of this, um, you know, online, or we could call it even hybrid environment. When everybody's kind of sick of Zoom, and how do we keep things fresh? How do we keep things kind of like relevant and engaging? How do we not lose the humanity in all of this, right? Um, it Nobody wants to live in like virtual reality land, right? So how do we keep the humanity in this kind of virtual medium? So I'd be interested to know. I don't know if folks want to write in the chat or come off mute, kind of like what, not everyone has to speak, but anyone want to volunteer any other adjectives or things that they're coming into this time with? In terms of weariness, I remember I said I was asking, like, is this still relevant for me? I was reflecting on this when I was in Hawaii, and I was thinking, no, yeah, like I looked up the definition of this word, which is exhausted in strength, endurance, vigor, or freshness, having one's patience, tolerance, or pleasure exhausted. And I was thinking, yeah, no, I still have some relationship to this word. Um, and when I was reflecting, I was with Krishna Roshi in Hawaii at the dojo there that, you know, is the dojo we have come out of. Um, and I was reflecting on kind of my relationship to that word, and I was remembering something that happened with Kushner Roshi years earlier, like when I was pretty early on in my Zen training. He he came down the stairs, I think in the context of sesshin in his basement, and I was kind of relaxing with another Zen student who I won't out in this story because they get kind of well, you'll see. But so I'm sitting there relaxing, and from the intensity of from sesshin, probably like hiding a little bit, and Krishna Rishi says, "Ah, sloth and lassitude." He's talking about me and this other person, right? And I had no, like, in that interaction, I had no question about, oh, which one's sloth and which one's lassitude. You know what I mean? Like, I knew I was lassitude. There was something about it that when he said it, it wasn't like, oh, that hurt. It was like, no, that's like so true. Like I've never heard a more true thing in my life, you know what I mean? And so lassitude, if you look up what is the definition of that, it's a state of physical or mental weariness, lack of energy, you know? And in those early days, I think I was kind of famous for Krishna Roshi as being like the person who showed up because he said I had to be there. We had at that point a zazen 2 times per week. One was like probably like Wednesday night and one was Sunday morning. And he said I had to show up, for both times. Like it wasn't optional. But, when I showed up on Sunday morning, it was usually barely awake and probably, I was like 24 years old or something at the time and probably had had too many beers with my friends the night before or whatever, like so I was there, but kind of not in a lot of ways. Um, and so in terms of this weariness, I'm talking about my relationship to this word, but I think what I, started by observing is that maybe it's feeling like a more general problem, during this pandemic. Like when I wrote that article several months ago before I went on, what was my first vacation of the pandemic, um, to Italy, I was reflecting a lot on like what is the pulse, like what is the energy of this time, Like yeah, some people maybe they have awesome habits and they became like a marathon runner during the pandemic. I have a few friends like that, like they're living their best lives, but most of us are not, and are struggling with all of the things that got disrupted during this time and how to, all of the habits that were associated with that kind of the frameworks of our lives, that got disrupted and all the kind of um, I don't know, bad habits or weariness that kind of replaced that. So in terms of my bad habits around time and energy, a few people, I think, like Paul started to talk about this, that he feels controlled. Yeah, I have that kind of habit as well. Like I have a very intense schedule and there's a lot of details that I'm tracking all the time. And so I often feel like I'm kind of like there's something external that I'm kind of chasing after rather than being, the center of my own life, it's like I'm a character in a story rather than being, the story, being um the main character and being, you know, being time, being um yeah, being that the center of the experience, right? I have a bad habit around overwork, over committing. In some ways, I would say my Zen training may have even exacerbated that. Like, because I have more energy, I can push longer, um, you know, than most, right? I can keep going when others, say, "Hey, I need a break." Um, and and then if I keep doing that long enough, I get kind of like a bit resentful because I don't have enough time to myself, right? And I think commonly when, besides those kind of things, which maybe are a bit more extreme or dysfunctional, we often have the sense that what that we that there's some logic around time and energy, right? That it's almost like there's an accounting system, right? We have 24 hours in a day, we can do the math, we can schedule it out, right? And if I subtract, X, Y, and Z, then I have this much. It's all very logical, and it's all very mathematical. And we often think too, like, if if I can, because I have this experience and I've kind of charted it out, I have all the data. If I do these things, this continues on this linear trajectory, and then I know what's going to happen next, right? Like, that's the kind of way we think about time and energy, right? And but in Zen, I want to raise that Zen teaches us all the time that that's not true. Okay, that 1 plus 1 doesn't always equal 2, or that these things are not linear. I remember having this kind of conversation with Paul. Sorry for outing you, Paul. Um, as he was getting ready to be a jiki for a zazenkai, and it was his first time being a jiki for an intense training. And we were having this conversation about, like, am I really up to the task? Like, I struggle with my own Zen training, so how am I going to be that person for somebody, for the whole group? Like, what if I feel like I need to give up? Like, how do I make those other people do more? And I was saying, well, you're thinking about it like in terms of the reference you have, and assuming that you know that applies, when you're the jiki. But when you're the jiki, it's totally different. So being the jiki gives you the chance to kind of go beyond your own limits, you know to access something else. And that's what we do when we do Zen training. And I wrote about this in the article, but basically the story was that Paul said, "Yeah, no, like, I found this new energy store when I was doing when I was doing the jiki duty. It was completely different. My awareness got bigger, my energy got bigger." And so that's the kind of thing that we find all the time when we get forced to go beyond, what we think our own uh, boundaries are. It's pretty classic. So, like I said, I went into this vacation period, so-called vacation period, in that kind of state where I'm like completely burnt out. And I went to the dojo in Hawaii, and I'm sure a lot of people have had this experience where it's like, you're trying to tell people, "Oh yeah, I'm going on vacation," and they're picturing you lying around on a beach. But I, I went I went directly to the dojo. I didn't stop at the beach, and immediately starts waking up very early in the morning to do zazen in the morning, doing archery or kudo most of the day, um, just training a lot. And by the end of the week, I'm thinking, wow, I feel completely different. I feel completely renewed again. But it's not the way you think that you get there, right? Like, most people think the way you get restored after being burnt out is just by putting enough hours on the couch and watching enough TV, right? Or something like that. I don't know what people think. I'd be interested to hear, but it's not commonly what you think, or enough beach time or something like that, right? But this time in the dojo, expending a lot of energy, um, doing a lot of zazen, doing a lot of martial arts, made me feel completely energized and restored again. Also in the context of the energy of the place and the other people that were there. It was almost like going to the hospital and getting fixed up again. It's interesting because when I lived in at the dojo, I was reminded of this That's the dojo I lived in for 6 months when I was like in 2006, when I was graduating from school before I was starting my first real job. Um, I went in there thinking like I'm someone who likes to sleep a lot, like I like not a lot, but like I like a good 7, 8 hours of sleep a day, so like how am I gonna do this? Like, because being a Zen monk, is not like that. You don't often get as much sleep as you want. And that was one of the things I was worried about when I went there. And it was like that this time too. Like, I mean, not that I was worried about the sleep because I knew that, but the fact that you could be sleeping um, a kind of less than optimal amount, but you could feel completely restored again. Um, and often, and what I was remembering was because I did this the first week, and then on the weekend, you get to sleep a little bit longer because Zazen's a little bit later, I think, on the weekend. Or yeah, something changes. So you get a little, you get like maybe like a half hour, an hour more sleep on the weekend. Um, and I always, on those weekends, even when I was a monk, I always felt like worse. It's really, really interesting. And I think it just relates to like the sort of the schedule of your sleep being like more important than the amount of sleep. And also like your sleep gets really efficient when you're living in the dojo. Like you lay down and you don't spend a lot of time like thinking like, oh, okay, now like I'm going to bed, like I have to really, you know, like get in the mood or something like that. It's like no, you lay down, you just go to sleep, you know what I mean? And then you're like sound asleep until the point you wake up, and you wake up and you, even if you've gotten 4 hours or whatever, you just feel like completely like I got enough sleep. Anyways, it happened to me again though when I was there, that on the weekend after I'd done a lot of training, that getting that extra sleep actually made me feel more tired. Like I needed more coffee than during the week. So that was a good reminder for me as well. I'm wondering for you guys, is there anything kind of counterintuitive or things that you've discovered about maybe time and energy, either during this time or. Yeah, great point. I really like that one. Often when we have that kind of injury or something, we avoid it, right? But that's like maybe the worst thing for us. I had to recover from a pretty like significant back injury for me, and I spent the first couple of weeks just like trying to do nothing, but that like made it worse, and it wasn't till I just started focusing on like doing the exercises I could do that I started to like kind of turn the corner on that. Yeah, thanks. Catherine? Thank you for sharing. That was a pretty amazing story, and I'm sorry for the loss of your dog. It sounds like she was really well taken care of, and you both gave a lot to each other. So thanks for sharing. There are so many different elements in your story, in terms of reflecting on like what is the nature of space and time and the different aspects of it. From uh, a Zen perspective, kind of the way Catherine was alluding to, the vantage point we have is here and now. We can't really escape that fact. That's just how we're built, as you could say, as human beings, but it's really like animals too. And for whatever reason, the way our minds are created, like built or whatever, within that here and now, there's also the past and the present. Okay, so you can be, your physical body is in the here and now, but you could be engaged somewhere else, right? And that's the way most of us spend our time. But that's what I was thinking about as Catherine was talking about walking in that labyrinth and just focusing on the sound of the swishy pants and the space in front of her, as she's walking, that moment by moment by moment, now quality, right? But so if you can be that, right? If you can be now, that is what you might call being time. It's a different experience than the way we usually engage as human beings, which is kind of a little bit scary if you think about it. Like, I don't know how many of you um, watch like sci-fi stuff. I'm not that into it, but there's a few things that I like. Like I like the movie The Matrix, and there was like this show Upload on Amazon Prime. You should check that out. That one's about like this guy. You can like upload to like a digital universe after you die, and it's really interesting. But in those kind of shows where there's like this virtual reality, right? Like the body's laying there of the person, but they're like, and the people in the real world are like interacting with that body, like, which is just kind of like laying there in a suspended state. But the people inside the body, they're like all in this whole other like little world and running around and doing stuff with like different like avatars and like this created reality and stuff like that. And that's kind of like in the worst case scenario, that's kind of the way it is for us as human beings, right? Like that's one of the reasons I started doing Zen, was because I realized like when people were talking to me, like I was sitting there in front of them, but I was like in this little universe in my head and not really like listening to what they were saying. Um, and so that's like an extreme, but it's kind of more common than you think. Like I don't know if you guys have all had that experience of not really listening to what's in front of you, or just kind of checking out, but it's probably happened to all of us. And some people, that's maybe it's almost like they're like that almost all the time, when you talk to them. And then maybe like for more commonly, there's some sort of like a delay, like be related to mental cognition. Like because like you ask someone a question and then there's like this long pause because they're like processing the answer, or even in the way we move around in the world. Like when I moved, that was a habit I had in Zen that I remember Green Roshi used to point out to me a lot, especially when I was living in. Like when you walk around, you notice that it's kind of like slow and like methodical. Like, why do you move around like that? Like it kind of bothers me the way you move around. And then I thought, oh, I don't know, like maybe that's just the way I am, like I don't know if he knows what he's talking about. Um, but then later on, Yokoyama Roshi said it to me in a different way at a different stage of my training. He said, "Do you need to think to walk around like that?" And I realized, no, I don't. I thought about it for a minute. And then I realized, no, I don't need to think to do a lot of things. I don't need to think to walk around. I don't need to think to do martial arts because it's in my body. I don't need to think to do a lot of the things around my house, like cleaning, putting away. I realized I could like sort uh, silverware like very fast, put away dishes after I take away the dishwasher because I know where all the things go. I don't need to think about it. But there's a delay associated with basically thinking about something else while you're doing the thing, and we don't realize it. And you can see it around the dojo in the way people move around. Some people are slower than everybody else, and it's not because they're like overweight or older or whatever. It's because of this thing. And I've done this. I've talked about this with other people who've had the same problem, and they've managed to fix it just by having it pointed out to them. um, so in Fudoshi, we talk about. There's this book that Ryan Roshi just gave a lecture on, Fudoshi, which means like the immovable mind, a mind that doesn't stop or has no dwelling place. So it sounds like kind of a contradiction, right? The immovable mind. What is it immovable from? You know? And then how does that mean that it's incapable of all the mobile, being infinitely mobile? But that's the kind of thing that Zen does with language. But the kind of consistent, the kind of sorry, examples or um, that you might point to of a mind that's like that. They give a lot of examples in that story or in that book. But one of them that I like is really simple. It's somebody yells Uemon, which is the guy's name, and the Uemon just says yes, without hesitation. And how many times, have all of us then, when our name gets called by our spouse or someone at work, instead of saying yes back, we sit there and we think, what does that guy want? You know what I mean? Like, are they gonna ask me to do the dishes? Like, do I have to take out the trash? Like, what, like, there's so much kind of like, whatever, like weariness attitude, in the way we respond when called. So like I was saying, we're now. um you can think of it like a flip book, like a picture book where you flip it, and that's the quality of time and space. It's just a bunch of different pictures that we're actually stringing together. We're creating time and space. We're creating this universe, but we don't realize it. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you that that's true. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'd like you to figure out that that's true on your own. But that's what I've realized about it. We do, I think, on the other side of that, we do have the common experience of time and space contracting based on our state of mind. So most of us have that experience and could come up with something that speaks to that example. But realize that in those examples that you have, you're the common denominator. The mind that, is observing all of those things, that's your mind. Okay? Time and space flow, and you're the one that's changing how, those things get experienced. So, in terms of energy, one of the things, the kinds of questions we were asking um, to explore was, is it like a fresh spring, which seems to have no end, or is it like a, a water reservoir, that you need to like build a fence around because it's the only water we have for the town, and you don't want anybody anybody's pets to kind of like poop in the reservoir because it's, it's a very important resource. And, you know, it's interesting to consider, especially as we age, what how is energy? Like, what is it like? Because it's actually different depending on how, and depending on whether you're young or old, right? It changes over time. And that is true in terms of how we usually have students train. We know um, in Zen training that we have a technology, and we know like we can apply X usually and get this result out of that. But often the way we'll apply it will be different based on someone's age, because when you're young, it is like 100% like a mountain spring. I mean, maybe there will be the exception depending on someone's health or whatever, but like we usually kind of like try to exhaust the young folks and let them find out what's on the other side of that. With older folks, they can also have that experience, but it takes a lot less, right? There's less kind of physical strength, maybe, that you need to break through. And you need to be careful about pushing too far, because um, their little reservoir, their reservoir is more like maybe like a gush, a little gush, rather than like a geyser or something. It's not gonna restore as quickly, but it's still there. You can still have this kind of experience. Patelli Sensei is smiling because I know he knows this is true, even as an old guy. Um, but the kind of way that we train is usually we through repetition. We do something so many times until someone breaks through and finds what's on the other side of that. They need to break through their own barriers. Like when we were in Hawaii and doing Kudo training, we had the newer students, before we even started most of the class time for the day, which ran through most of the day. We had the newer students do 100 makiwara shots before we even started class. That's a lot. It took them a few hours to complete, because I don't know if you know about Kudo, but it's a pretty like, I mean, just doing one shot, it takes a while to do one shot. We had them try to speed it up, maybe they got down to like where they could do it in a little over an hour or something, but we got them to the point of exhaustion before we even started for the day, because we needed them to take away their bad habits, get to the point where they're pulling the bow more with their bones, and setting up like this perfect opposition of forces, with their bones, and less with like their strength and all of, their young bodies, and, just like if you wanted to do it like that with your ego, you could, but we wanted them to get it beyond that, where they could find and draw upon, ki and other things deeper inside them. So we talk about like ki first, giving it all you got. And we also talk about like if you threw out all the water, give it your all, there's something left. We say zanshin, there's always some little energy left. Like if you threw out all the water in a cup, there would always be like that water residue inside the cup that was left, right? And often that that what's left is often bigger than we think, right? Like you can do that, give it your all. You can do it quite a few times. And often what comes out of that is like the instead of like having the little few water droplets come out, it's like something completely different happens. Like you throw the water out and all of a sudden it starts boiling, instead of going away. Like something completely different happens. And that's the kind of what we're trying to get people to experience. That experience, like Catherine was saying, like it's almost like vigor leads to more vigor, you know, energy leads to more energy. But the reason we don't go around acting like this all the time is because we're scared, right? We have a lot of fears around it, and they're fears that make sense. They go to the core of what it means to be like a living organism. Fears around basically self-preservation, right? You start to worry when you're doing an intense enough training, like, am I gonna expire? Am I gonna, what's gonna happen? Like you start to have real thoughts about, like, whether you're gonna make it through to the other side. It can feel very real. But we don't want you to just survive to get to the other side. We want some transformation to happen in the process. And there's a way to achieve that. Um, so another thing that I've been sort of getting more in touch with recently is like the, I don't know, I call it like the concept of desire, but it's more like what is the desire or curiosity inside of me, and where is it leading me? It's almost like listening to your inner voice. Maybe you could call it your intuition. Um, what are you being told about what life has in store for you? What the next step is. Um, and I'd encourage you to do the same. That's part of what I was saying about, when you make an activity, do something that calls you. Um, but you need to be careful about listening to voices inside your head, because there's more than one voice. There's that self-preservation voice, right? There's a lot of voices actually. And you need to become really discerning about, like, what is the voice that you should be listening to that's telling you something real, you know? And um the voice of intuition, it's not the voice of your ego. It's not even the voice of, you could say like your id, the one that's telling you to eat, or I don't know, who you like or something. I mean, I don't know if I'd use surrender is an interesting word. I don't know if it's a word I would use a lot. I probably would never use that word, but I would, in my own kind of self-concept, use a word like give up, give in, you know? Like when you're sitting zazen and you're having those kind of feelings like, oh, I'm gonna die, or something bad's gonna happen to me, or like being scared about what happens if you let go. I would say, yeah, go, let it go. So maybe for you that means surrendering, you know what I mean? It's like there's something that you're resisting, and what happens if you let go of that? So maybe for you that makes sense to think of as surrendering. But in terms of the intuition thing, or the listening to that inner voice, yeah, it's you need to listen hard, right? Because it may not be the most dominant voice in your head, but it's something like, there's some voice that led you here today, to tell you that there was, I don't know, something here that you needed to hear, or that led you to Zen training, or that led you I don't know, just think about all the different opportunities or experiences that you've had that seem kind of random, but there was somehow some sort of conscious choice involved, right? That somehow when you look back, it feels significant and exactly what needed to happen at that point, right? So, in terms of what the antidote to weariness is, I don't know that I have all the answers, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think. And I don't even remember how long I said this talk would go on for, but I'm about to wrap it up. um, and sorry if it was only supposed to go to 8:30. But in terms of things we have our zazen, right? And the important thing about zazen is it helps us remember who we are. That we're not the person, the persona we put on, in our daily life. We're more than that. And zazen reminds us of that. Yeah, Dennis. Yeah, I mean Zen is about being, not knowing. It's not about like learning things, right? It's about being, not about knowing. And I think what's helpful, there's many helpful things in what you said, but um, just to raise, as you get older, at least I'm finding, and I sort of observe this in my colleagues as well, that one thing that's helpful about getting older is like it makes the voice a little bit louder, right? Because you know that you have a limited amount of time, and it's like, well, fuck that noise. Like, I'm not going to do what that guy wants me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do, you know? And you're just more like tapping into, you know, what that is. And it's just a matter of like squeezing out, that last marrow. Robert? No, you're right. It does take great courage. I mean, all the Zen, the great Zen masters talk about, building up the courage, like basically having the attitude like I'm willing to die on the cushion. It sounds crazy because in reality we know that very very few, like let's say none of people die doing zazen, but it feels that way. You have to be willing to take the kind of leap off the cliff, the jump off the 100-foot pole to get to the other side, the big other side of what we're talking about. Um, I don't know. Any other comments? Yeah, Anne. Yeah, I had like kind of a list of antidotes and maybe I'll go through them a bit more. People had interesting comments and then people can maybe share any more. So we had Zazen, remembering who we are, right? There's something also basic in terms of weariness. Just a reminder, I don't know that this is really Zen or not, but we need to take care of the body and like the connections that we have to other people. It's just kind of the basics, you know what I mean? Of being a human being. We can't ignore those pieces. Um, Being on your own time, which is basically like nature time. So throwing out the phone. Like I remember when I was in the dojo in my last stages, I was of completing my, training, my formal training. Um, the Roshi there saying to me, no, like you're too worried about the schedule and doing all the things for, the other people. Like, just go train on your own in your own room, be on your own time. And that was really, really good advice because most of us have no concept of what that means. He said, look at things in nature, watch how the plants are moving in the wind. You know, that's the kind of, you need to go into that place of being on your own time. We talked about following your heart's desire, being the star of your own show, not the guest star. And I don't mean that in an antisocial or narcissistic kind of way, but being firmly grounded in your own hara and what you want, and listening for intuition. Doing things that require energy, or doing things with energy, with vigor, because life gives life. And most people benefit from expending their energy in the right way. I talked about this in the piece I wrote about how I had to. There's a priest training that Sensei puts a lot of energy into. He's leading all of the morning training most of the time, and I was asked to lead the evening training for a series of 3 weeks, and I'm thinking, oh my God, like, how can I fit in this one other thing into my life? But when I started doing it, it was like, oh, it's like I gave a half hour of my day, but what I got out of it seemed to be like I was getting 2 hours back or something, in terms of the quality of the interactions I was having with other people, in terms of how it helped my Zen training. So, oftentimes when we engage in the right ways, especially when it's, working to help other people, we get a lot more back from it than what we put in. And we need to be careful about monotony. I think it was Dennis said, expending energy works better in pulses. It's true. We can't just keep giving 100% forever. There's a certain point where it's not going to work anymore, or it's going to get to the point where it feels like dead wood, right? We're not robots. Good habits are good, but if you're too rigid in your habits, that becomes kind of its own bad habit, right? You need to keep it fresh, you need to keep it funky, however whatever kind of suits you. Or, instead of giving life, we're going to be giving something else that's closer to like death, right? So those are my comments. Any last comments or antidotes that you guys have? Okay. Well, thanks for sticking around. I know that I had fun with you all.